Minister of Consumer Services.
Thank you, Speaker. So I'm very pleased to rise to speak about the reintroduction of the Great Lakes Protection Act. So if I may, Speaker, I'm going to just recap a bit about that first, and then I'd like to talk about what this means in my riding of Pickering Scarborough East, because waterways, including Lake Ontario and the Rouge River that runs through my riding and feeds into Lake Ontario, as well as Highland Creek, are boundaries of my riding, actually. I don't think it's too common. We have too many ridings that are surrounded by water, and that those water boundaries are indeed the riding boundaries. And I will talk a little bit about Frenchman's Bay as well, which is a very important watershed in our Great Lakes system, and how this is very near and dear to the residents in my riding, because this is what I devoted my maiden resolution speech to, and there's been great developments on that since I did that speech back in November of 2011. So just first, I guess, to recap on what we're doing here with the Great Lakes Protection Act. On February 25th of this month, the Act was reintroduced for first reading, and the proposed legislation is indeed enabling and includes flexible tools to work with local organizations, build on existing programs and other groups for targeted action. The proposed Act was an election commitment of the Liberal government in 2011. It was part of the recent throne speech and Premier Wynn's commitment to Ontarians. It was first introduced in June 2012, and it was affected by prorogation. So here we are now reintroducing it. However, things happened during prorogation. Things continued to move. And going back to the summer, the public was invited to comment on the proposed act through the environmental bills of rights, and the meetings with stakeholders were held, and I know others were busy working on preparing to reintroduce this during prorogation and since it ended. So why do we need a Great Lakes Protection Act, Speaker? I think we all know the Great Lakes are vitally important to the people of Ontario for drinking water, quality of life, and prosperity. We need to restore them now to continue and enjoy their benefits for this and future generations. And so much work, as you know, Speaker, we do in this legislature is not about today, it is about the future. And this piece of legislation is no exception to that. New challenges are overwhelming old solutions when it comes to our Great Lakes in Ontario. That's why we need new initiatives to help the Great Lakes. The proposed Great Lakes Protection Act is designed to give the province new tools to restore and protect our Great Lakes so they're drinkable, swimmable, and fishable. The Great Lakes provide more than 80% of our drinking water and are important to the people of Ontario for economic prosperity. Over 95% of Ontario's agricultural land is in the Great Lakes Basin. Scientists tell us that 3 of our 4 Great Lakes are in decline, and they are Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and Lake Huron. While developing this legislation, we've listened to the people of Ontario, and they were clear about the importance of this legislation to protect the Great Lakes. We will consider amendments during the legislative period to reflect the feedback we received following the introduction of the bill last year. We'll continue, Speaker, to listen to First Nations and Métis communities, Great Lake experts, municipal leaders, interested stakeholders, and the people of Ontario as the legislation proceeds throughout the House. And I guess the big question is, what would exactly this piece of legislation do? So if passed, it would help restore and protect the Great Lakes, as I mentioned before, so they're drinkable, fishable, and swimmable. And the purpose of the proposed acts are twofold. One is to protect and restore the ecological health of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin, and 2, to create opportunities for individuals and communities to become involved in the protection and the restoration of ecological health of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin. The proposed act would create a Great Lakes Guardian Council, which would provide a collaborative forum among Great Lakes ministers and others, including Aboriginal, business, agriculture, environmental, and municipal reps, to talk about priorities, potential financial measures, and partnerships for projects, and sharing information. The act would require the minister to maintain the Ontario Great Lakes Strategy, the first Ontario roadmap ever, which lays out provincial priorities for Great Lake protection. It would also enable the minister to set Great Lakes science-based targets, and finally, following consultations with local groups, enable the establishment of a geologically focused initiative to take focused action in priority coastal, watershed, and other ecologically significant areas. What gaps does this proposed act fill? We're very fortunate in Ontario to have leading legislation that covers specific areas such as drinking water, testing, for example. However, we don't have a comprehensive suite of tools to address the combined stresses on the Great Lakes at a regional level. In the sessions that have been conducted by the ministry, we heard the need for more comprehensive approaches. The act will allow for local groups, the province, and others to work towards comprehensive solutions for a specific area. We also heard the need to bring players together for coordinated and focused action, and so the Act creates the Great Lakes Guardians Council speaker. And we also heard the need for clear science-based targets, so the Act will allow for the development of these targets. Speaker, when I think about the Great Lakes, I immediately think, as I said at the beginning of my comments here this afternoon, I immediately think of my maiden resolution in this legislature in December of 2011. My resolution asked the government to consider joining two other levels of government, the federal government and the municipal government in the region of Durham, to support the rehabilitation of the Frenchman's Bay Harbour front entrance with a $3 million infrastructure investment. And that would, it was proposed at that time to be supported by the same amounts by the other two levels of government. So this is a very important watershed in my riding of Pickering, Scarborough East, and I was absolutely thrilled that that resolution received unanimous consent from all three levels, from all three parties in our legislature. And I think that happened for a couple of reasons. I think it's because we all agreed that sometimes it just makes sense to support particular projects, no matter what party stripe you come from, no matter what part of the House you sit on. And in this case, safety was a compelling reason to support the restoration of the harborfront entrance in Frenchman's Bay. Safety was a huge issue, is a huge issue, because on a navigational map, Speaker, Frenchman's Bay Harbour is identified as one of the most dangerous harbours in all of Ontario. Of course, many economic and tourism benefits are going to come from that harbour entrance being restored. There'll be more boats, there'll be more tourism, there'll be more spending, there will be a boost to the local economy, and it will restore the harbour entrance to a level where we'll have, you know, I think it's 1,500 boats we used to have at that harboring at that entrance, as opposed to a mere few hundred that are currently there. But most importantly, and last but not least, Speaker, the most, I think, compelling point was that there were, and there are, many ecological benefits to improving that harbourfront entrance. And when I was doing my research, Speaker, for that project and developing that resolution to present here in the legislature, I have actually used this approach in subsequent initiatives on behalf of my constituents in Pickering, Scarborough East. And, you know, first and foremost, listening to people, listening to what people see as the issues and opportunities, and talking to, you know, all the stakeholders. I also learned from that exercise that it is important to consult the experts, and I recall conferring with the head of geography and ecology at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus, who actually, joined me in my constituent office and undertook to give me some expert advice on whether this project should proceed. Because as we know, Speaker, when we look at changing things, there's different views, and not everyone may be on board, and indeed, not absolutely everybody in my riding is totally supportive of the harbourfront entrance expansion, but I feel it's my job to get that expert advice, listen to people, and I think this approach, quite frankly, has served me well. It has served other members of this House very well, and it is, and I think at the end of the day, that's one of the reasons it was, I think, fairly easy for all sides of this House to support that project, because the benefits were there, Speaker. The benefits were there. The risks were low, if not non-existent, and it was a shovel-ready project, Speaker. And not only did all the parties in this House agree to it, but all levels of government ended up contributing to the project, including the federal government. And on, I think it was July 1st of last year, when we got all the funding secured by all levels of government, it was announced. So that was fantastic. It was a great candidate gift for Pickering Scarborough East. Well, we did. We had a candidate parade, and we had lots of things going on. Free hamburgers, as the member from Peterborough is mentioning. It was a great day. And Speaker, it's a change in the community. The big trucks are in now, out there building the new barges, and it's causing, of course, some disruption in the community as this project unfolds for the next couple of while, but and this is the west side of the Frenchman's Bay Harbor, but people in my riding also know on the east side of the harbor there was a huge restoration project on the waterfront at the foot of Liverpool Road, and that was disruptive too. There was lots of construction and dust, but at the end of the day, they got a beautiful community, a center that combines great retail opportunities as well as waterfront activities for everybody to enjoy. So I think as this project, the Frenchman's Bay Harbor entrance project continues, we'll get closer to seeing the benefits that I talked about before. I mentioned that the Great Lakes is important to my riding because of the water that defines many sides of my riding. Lake Ontario on the south side, Highland Creek defines the southwest side of my riding, and the Rouge River, which I mentioned before, flows right through my riding into Lake Ontario. And we all know about the Rouge Park, and it's moving forward to being a great national park. And there are many residents in my riding who are very concerned about and focus on the ecological conditions of that and the preservation of all the watersheds around that. So again, residents in my community and other nearby ones have participated actively in public consultations about the proposed Rouge National Park. And Speaker, while there are some issues, while there are many opportunities, such as the transit issues to and from the park, new business and tourism opportunities, the main concern, as I've heard attending those public consultations, is people want a balance. They want a balance of those ecological conditions, respect for the watersheds, while looking at new ways to engage communities in this exciting national park that we're going to have. The park's there already, of course. It's a matter of refocusing it as a national park. Yes, it's incredible how many people live right nearby it. Tens of thousands of people live right next to the Rouge Park. And Lake Ontario, as part of that park, is paramount. So Well, I think actually we're well underway to moving that forward in terms of an arrangement with the federal government, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to enjoy that park. Everyone wants to enjoy the waterways around that, and I'm very hopeful that that people will see more details of that shortly. But going back to the Great Lakes Protection Act, Speaker, I think we need to recognize what it is going to achieve for us in terms of going forward, what we don't have now, what we'll have in the future, and it will help protect and restore Great Lakes so that they are drinkable, swimmable, and fishable. Sounds like a logo or a slogan maybe that we can use going forward. It sounds fishy, indeed it does. And people do need that kind of protection, because sometimes I think, Speaker, we take it for granted. We take it for granted, the water we drink, the food we enjoy, the electricity, the employment, the enjoyment, all those things that are indeed associated with the Great Lakes. Yet the science shows that 3 of our 4 Great Lakes are indeed in decline. So we do need new solutions to some of the problems that have contributed to that. There's much to protect, Speaker, and we know the Great Lakes are one of those key underpinning things in Ontario's economy. Not something you think of every day, but is definitely there. The lakes contribute billions of dollars of wealth annually, supplying energy, providing water for industry, agriculture, shipping goods, recreation, and tourism. And that I see is only growing, Speaker. I know in the region of Durham where I live, there's been some discussion about should we have a food terminal in Oshawa, and that, if that was to be pursued, Speaker, would be adjacent to the lake. So you can see how our local and provincial economy intersects with the Great Lakes, in this case, Lake Ontario. The Great Lakes, as I said before, provide over 80% of our drinking water, and that's something I know people take for granted sometimes. You know, we all turn our tap on or get water out of the filtration system on our fridges, and we're really blessed, Speaker, to be able to have that in Ontario, because we certainly know that is not the case in other parts of the world. So we need to protect what we have and ensure it's there for the future. And the Great Lakes Protection Act would create the tools to help make the Great Lakes be there for us in the future, for us, our children, and our grandchildren. So we're lucky in Ontario to have leading legislation that covers specific areas, such as in drinking water. However, we don't really have the tools necessary, Speaker, to achieve that vision for the future. And we heard about the need to have that. So this legislation will bring players together, more in addition to what's already happened in leading up to the reintroduction of this bill. And we need to keep focused on the clear science-based targets. So the Act allows for the development to set these targets. And Speaker, you see that in, I think, almost everything our government puts forward. Evidence-based, target-based, because at the end of the day, there's more demands than maybe our resources allow, Speaker. So things have to be evidence-based. And going back to my Frenchman's Bay example, you'll recall I stated that I consulted the experts. I asked for the expert opinion, and that professor from U of T Scarborough indeed endorsed the Frenchman's Bay Harbour, and in fact said it would not compete with other important environmental initiatives to preserve the ecological conditions of, in this case, Frenchman's Bay. So I think it is important we continue to consult with experts. It is important that we have targets going forward. And certainly in my riding of Pickering Scarborough East, with so much wonderful water around our communities, whether it's in the Scarborough part of my riding, whether it's in the Pickering part of my riding, our community, and I believe all other communities in Ontario value that. They want to make sure we're wisely protecting that, carefully making the right kind of investments, and that our strategies will result in the preservation of the lakes for not just us, today's speaker, but our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. So I thank you, Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to this important piece of legislation, and I look forward to further debate. Thank you.